So we'd like to welcome everyone to our new panel. This is Changemaker Lawyers, Creative Lawyering for the Conceptual Age, and we're going to start by sharing our short video. So we'd like to welcome everyone to our new panel.
Welcome. Great to have you here. This is a unique moment, a moment that unites all of us. We all face anxiety and loss. We all see broken systems. We all experience the impact of the climate crisis. This is a unique moment. This is a turning point if we choose to make it one. This is a moment to reflect, to learn, to share, and to co-create. And I invite you to contribute. I ask you to contribute. I ask you to partner to fix broken systems. I ask you to join the movement so everyone can step into their change-making power. I ask you to nominate the next generation of change makers. And I ask you to share your wisdom, your knowledge, your expertise. And I ask you to donate to support changemakers. This is our moment to fix the world. This is our moment to contribute. Today is the day, and you are the one.
Again, thank you all for coming. That was just a short video from Marie, and this is Changemaker Lawyers, Creative Lawyering for the Conceptual Age. Just a brief introduction, I'm Anna, and I'll be coordinating the session for everyone, monitoring the chat, and our moderator is Annette.
Thanks, Anna. Hi, everyone. I'm Annette McGee-Johnson, and I'm Global Legal Director at Ashoka. Thanks for joining us today. As part of the legal team, which now sits at the integrity team at Ashoka, we are trying to increase our engagement with the Changemaker lawyer ecosystem. And that goes from practitioners as well as to law students. So we are happy to have Anna's colleagues from the Wild Legal Innovator program joining us as well. So we welcome you. And so I will now move into introducing our panelists, and we're very happy to have each of you. I know you're all very busy doing a lot of creative change making out in the world, but you've made time to be here with us. So I will introduce you, and then Anna will give us a little map of how the session will go, and then we'll jump right into the conversation, starting with a question for our panelists. First is Stephanie Dangle, and Stephanie is a professor of practice at the University of Pittsburgh School of Law, where she teaches lawyers and other change makers in experiential courses and public seminars on law, social innovation, technology commercialization, and entertainment. She has also enjoyed successful careers as a practicing lawyer, social innovator, documentary filmmaker, and law clerk to Justice Harry Blackmun. Next on our panel, we have Lam Ho. Lam is a public interest attorney committed to serving the most disadvantaged with extensive experience in numerous areas of poverty and civil rights law. Lam is dedicated to and skilled in different forms of community-based lawyering through his work as the executive director of Beyond Legal Aid, which was founded with the Harvard Law School Public Service Venture Fund seed grant. And then we have Alain Werner from Switzerland. Alain is a lawyer registered with the Geneva Bar with a Master's of Law from Columbia University. Alain has been working in the field of international criminal law on the side of the victims for 20 years and participated in some of the most important trials of war criminals in the past few years. In 2012, Alain founded Civitas Maxima in Geneva, an international network of lawyers and investigators, which presents and seeks justice on behalf of victims of international crimes. In November 2020, Alain will represents several Liberian victims in the first ever war crime trial in Switzerland in front of the Swiss Federal Criminal Court. And then last but not least, we have Luciana Zafalon from Brazil. Luciana is an attorney who studies the governance of legal systems. For the past few years, Luciana has been working with Justa, researching how the systems and practices employed by courts around the world worsen inequality. She's also creating a toolkit of innovative strategies to enable legal systems to overcome structural bias against the poor and to promote equality. Welcome to all of you. And then Anna will give us our roadmap before we jump into the conversation.
Thank you, Annette. To engage some of the audience, I shared a link in the chat. If you scroll up to the top, I can reshare it as well. A quick Menti poll to get you everyone thinking. So you can take a few moments to answer that while I quickly go over how this is going to be set up. I'm so glad to have all of our panelists here today. And we're going to start with a discussion session with some questions prompted and moderated by Annette. And then following that, we'll open the floor to questions. So I'll take questions from the chat box for about 15 minutes near the end of the session and present those to our speakers to get everyone engaged and to have them share as well. So our first question is, how can lawyers contribute to society to create positive change? Feel free to enter your words and we'll get a map of the different ways that people envision the legal field and how people can contribute. So we have ethics, partnership, integrity, co-creation, so of course, justice, partnership, co-creation, impact, advocacy, strategy. And I believe that these are all things that our panelists embody. So moving on to the next question. This is a scale question. Lawyers' roles in society will evolve significantly over time. Yes. Law school prepares one to address challenges across disciplines, and lawyers possess skills adept at problem solving. So we're across the board here, and you can see there's quite a bit of distribution. This will be really interesting going into our questions for today. So Annette, that's back to you. Let's start this discussion.
Thanks, Anna. So for most of us in this conversation, we've gone to law school or we're going to attend law school. And so the first question for our panelists is that attorneys learn specific skill sets in law school. And we are wondering what skills make lawyers uniquely placed to address social issues and entrepreneurial endeavors. And we'll start with Luciana. Should I repeat the question? Was I going too fast or?
Yes, please.
Okay. So what skills make lawyers uniquely placed to address social issues and entrepreneurial endeavors?
Okay. I don't think it's an easy answer. First of all, I think maybe we should rethink how this kind of acknowledgement is seen by our society. It's hard to me to believe that we can still put our energy in this belief that just one kind of acknowledgement will be able to put us in the best way to find complex solutions for the complex problems that we have. I really think the lawyers need to learn different kinds of ways to be in the world and how to learn with different cultures and different kind of knowledgement, and how to create a new model to solve our conflicts and our inequalities.
Thanks, Luciana. So you feel like the skills that we learn in law school need to be diversified and to take more into account the structures within society and how these skills would meet the needs of addressing the issues in these structures.
Yeah, you see, all around the world, we have great constitution and very powerful judicial system. But putting these two elements together, all we can see is more inequality. And when we look at criminal justice, the barbarian. So I really think we need to try to figure out how to build new ways to open the law to different ways to solve our problems.
That's a really good point, because a lot of people would assume that in systems where there's injustice, that maybe it's because of a lack of rule of law, or as far as having laws on the books, but it's the implementation of the law and the interpretation of the law that's usually the issue. And so we'll turn over to Lam to share your perspective on this question.
So I 100% agree with Luciana in terms of the need for us to really rethink the institution of law and lawyering. I think one of the things that is really one of the tools that we do have as lawyers and that law school does provide us, at least from an American context, is a law degree, which gives us access to the bar, which gives us access to courts and the institution of legal power. And I think one of the ways that if we really want to see the law as an institution and lawyers as a force for positive change, I think that the roles that lawyers can take, and lawyers who are committed to social change, the role that they can take is thinking and contributing to how this institution, which does have a lot of power, that we do have a lot of access to power, how do we share that power? How do we make that power more accessible to those who are most directly impacted by injustice? And very importantly, how do we ensure that this access, that our law degrees, our bar membership, can reallocate in a more equitable way? Because I think that as we talked about, we have powerful constitutions, we have powerful laws that provide protections, but who actually has access to implementing, to using those protections, and who decides who is included or excluded from those protections or those constitutional rights? I certainly am speaking very much from an American perspective, but I think when you think of constitutions, what happens with constitutions is it outlines certain sets of privileges, entitlements, rights, and protections. What courts do and what lawyers do very often is interpret and define where the boundaries of who gets those rights, those protections. And all too often, we are really complicit in really denying access and excluding people from those rights, protections, entitlements. So I think for the role that we can take and the way that we can use the tools that we did get in law school is to rethink and contribute to changing who makes those decisions, who has the power in creating the boundaries, and whether or not we should have any boundaries.
Thanks, Lam. If you could talk a little bit about how your perspective informs your work at Beyond Legal Aid, I think that'd be really interesting.
Sure. So basically, we our motto in some ways for our practice at Legal Aid is to decenter the law and depower the lawyer. So it's, you know, it's a pretty out there in the sense of, especially when we're speaking about the role that lawyers could play. But we use that to really highlight how in the US, the institution of law, the rule of law, really often denies the voice and the decision-making of those who are supposed to be impacted by these laws. And so we work with a lot of undocumented immigrants who, for example, are denied a lot of constitutional rights by the courts, but also even our legal system, which federal funding denies most legal aid organizations from representing undocumented immigrants or prisoners, sex workers, community activists. So what we do is basically try to shift that dynamic of saying, instead of lawyers and courts making decisions around who can assert their rights, how do we get those impacted communities to be at the forefront, to have the voices and have and take the lead? What we do at Beyond is we basically support underserved communities, as I mentioned, undocumented immigrants, sex workers, day laborers, grassroots activists, and we basically support them to create their own legal programs, and they set the rules. And so we have this paradigm of, instead of lawyers making decisions and deciding who gets to have their cases handled, how we handle a case, we then have our attorneys basically really go back to a very traditional, in some ways, a very traditional understanding of legal practice, which is we are advocates for somebody else's voice. We're advocates for somebody else's leadership. So all of our programs, we have we're based in Chicago, Illinois, in the US, and we have about 20-something programs. All of our programs are operated in underserved communities, and they make all the decisions regarding who's eligible for legal service, what cases we take on, what areas of law we practice, what hours we practice, any decision, even litigation decisions. So if we're working on a case with an activist group, they'll decide which legal claims to forward. They'll review all of our briefs. They'll review the complaints. They'll make decisions. A lot of times they actually make decisions, and I think this is a really important part of the conversation in terms of being creative. We as lawyers, we have sort of certain routines or strategies that we use, and we'll make recommendations. But a lot of times we actually are not the most creative people. Well, let me just speak for myself, right? I don't want to speak for everyone on this panel because I think there's a lot more creativity. But for myself, lawyers can sometimes be not the most creative people because we operate on a system of precedents and the rule of law. So a lot of times with litigation, we actually have community organizers and activists who make a decision and say, that's your legal recommendation, and you may think that may win the case from your legal experience, but we actually want you to do something completely different because it supports our community organizing goals or our activism goals. And so we'll defer to them because the idea is they're setting the agenda. And what we've experienced so far is a lot of times those collaborations where we're deferring to decisions that may not be the optimal legal strategy, we actually end up getting much better results because these strategies are better from a problem-solving perspective. So as lawyers, are we more interested in problem-solving and change, or are we more interested in winning cases? And I argue that if we want to create positive change, we need to shift to a lens of how do we solve problems, particularly at a systemic level, and not just how do we win cases.
Thank you, Lim. Really, really powerful insights. We're gonna now go to Alan for a little bit of perspective from your experience in receiving a legal education in Europe, in terms of what skills do you think prepared you to address social issues and for entrepreneurial endeavors?
Yes, thanks a lot. I'm super happy to be here. I'm a little bit puzzled now by what has been said, because I quite agree. But it's true that the education I received in Europe of legal education was very academic. It was a great education in Geneva. It was free, complete, still is free. So this is something which is very important, especially, I guess, when you talked about the US, because I went to do a master's at Columbia later, and I was struck by the fact that most of the students get a lot of depth and have to repay, when for us, we had this fantastic privilege of being completely educated and become lawyer with almost no cost, so nothing to repay, which was very important. But at the same time, it's true that I had spent my entire first 20 years with a father who is a lawyer, who told me almost not every day, but every month, because I had been to Harvard Law School, and his professor was Stephen Breyer, who then became Supreme Court, as you all know. And he told him, my father one day told him, there is no substitute for your own thinking. And that really struck my father, who told me that my entire childhood told me I should go to a US law school, which I was almost forced to go because he spent 20 years of my life after telling me I had to go to. So I went to Columbia, and it's true, maybe I was a bit, very influenced by what my father had told me for so many years. But it's true that from Europe, when you go to this master's program in a school like Columbia, it's completely mind-blowing, because there was such a freedom. I was attending a lecture at night on biblical jurisprudence, and they tell you how to think so outside the box and all this fantastic creative thinking. So it's true that I always thought that the way I was able as an international lawyer, then with other lawyers, to use universal jurisdiction as we do now to get justice for international crimes, I always thought it was thanks to the US law schools. So, but that being said, and probably I'm a bit biased on the other side, coming from Europe. So maybe it has nothing to do, maybe just because of the luck and who I am and other lawyers. But it's true that I thought it was a great freedom of tone in the US law school, getting you involved, not just listening as we do in Europe, but getting you in thinking. But again, I am questioning myself now to know whether I have some bias.
And I wonder if your experience would have been different if you had gone to the first stage of law school rather than an LLM program. So
absolutely
that probably
correct.
is part of the distinction.
Absolutely correct.
I don't know if there are any parallels between what Lam was discussing in terms of access and who gets access to justice, but it's very interesting, the work that you do, Alan, that you're defending people from completely different jurisdictions and bringing people to trial for crimes committed in jurisdictions outside of where they're being tried. What legal tools have you used to be able to establish jurisdiction over these people and to hold them accountable somewhere in the world, when we know it's not always possible for them to be held accountable where the actual crimes were committed?
No, but I relate very much to what Lam was saying about that, because this is really, I see as an international lawyer, you have fantastic tools with international law, and you can do many, many things, but you have absolutely to think outside the box and basically be convinced that you can use some avenue which are maybe not immediately available. So yes, to answer your questions, yes, we do represent now mainly Western African victims, forgotten victims of war crimes. And it has been interesting because you cannot represent them. So in Western Africa, where we work, including Liberia, that obviously you know very well, there have been impunity for 2 civil wars. It's not possible to, still today, there has been no war crime court there. And we don't think it's really possible to bring litigation there. So then you have to think outside the box, because where the crimes happen, you cannot do anything. And this is where you have different legal tools. In Europe, we have what we call universal jurisdiction. In Switzerland, you mentioned, but in other countries, where basically if an alleged perpetrator leaves or even travels sometimes in your country, then you can hold him accountable. And this is quite incredible if you think about that. You mentioned the trial in Switzerland coming up in 2 weeks. So we have a guy here, and I am the one who filed the criminal complaint 6 years ago against him, then the guy didn't kill anyone in Switzerland. He's not Swiss. He did nothing in Switzerland. There's no Swiss victim. So the victims are from Africa, happened in Africa. He's African, yet because he has been living in Switzerland for over 15 years, or it doesn't matter, could have been 2 years, there we have the possibility to get him here for war crimes. But it's different everywhere. And our two first successful cases, believe it or not, were in Philadelphia. And in Philadelphia, as you know, there was no war crime laws in your country allowing a US court to go after, for example, a Liberian alleged perpetrator for war crime. There was none. So we used other tools, and it was not without question, and it was a very long discussion for us to use immigration, but we did it in a way which was a criminal offense. And then we did it in a way that allowed basically prosecutor in the US to go after the people we thought had committed war crimes. And they went after them for basically perjury, having lied on immigration forms. Of course, we were very nervous at the beginning doing it because you can understand the problems saying some asylum seeker in the US are basically war criminals. So we were very careful in the approach we took. But on behalf of the Liberian victim, I can tell you it was a big success, because at the end you had Liberian victim traveling from Liberia to the US to testify in a US court against former very high level commander of the civil war. And these people were punished with, actually one of them got 30 years in jail. And the Liberian victim we represented, we assisted, really got the sense to have achieved justice. So you see, without being creative, you cannot do it, because in Europe, different law than the US, different law than somewhere else. And you have to try to find a way on behalf of the forgotten victims of war crime you represent to get that access. So I very, very much agree with Lime. I think the job for us is to think outside the box and to understand how you can use available legal mechanism, even if nobody used them before, in order to get justice for your victims.
No complaints here from someone who's from Liberia and lived through the war. And I was telling Alain before we started, we definitely have to have a long conversation. This is controversial and we can't cover here, but a lot of people also complain that war criminals from Africa, including and specifically presidents, are being brought to justice in other parts of the world, but that doesn't necessarily happen with people from Europe or the US who may commit similar atrocities.
And I agree about that. I agree about that.
But I wanted to now get to Luciana. It's amazing that you, as part of this legal system, are challenging the practices within the system at the level of the judiciary. And so in terms of how you see the role of legal professionals evolving, I'm really interested in that. And how do people see you as you go about doing this work? Do they see you as someone as an outsider, because you're very much a part of the legal profession?
Well, the effort that I'm working with is at least I work with criminal justice. And it's really hard when we go to a prison in Brazil, for example, but it's the same all around the global South. You go to a prison, you meet someone, and the only feeling that you can have is there is nothing that we can do in this person's time life, or even the son of these people time life, that can really change the reality of our poor and Black people. So it's really hard to me to when many times human rights lawyers and people like me, we used to put the judicial system as part of the solution of our main democratical problem. But when we really look at the results of our justice system, what we can see is that the judicial system is actually part of our main problem. So the effort is to try to figure out how can we have other kind of power in this kind of dispute. So I am part of the Brazilian judicial system. There is no way to be out of this, working so hard with this for so many years. But it's not like only a. Actually, what I saw is that making research and looking to our judicial system, comparing with others, and understanding how the judicial system is working all around the world, make me feel that as a researcher, I'm bringing more innovative perspectives to our fights than as a lawyer working in this kind of courts that are responsible for all the violation that we are facing. Because if we think in our judicial system, I'm talking about criminal justice, but we can talk about health. In Brazil, it's the same kind of problem, or even habitation or education, any kind of important issue is related with political disputes that ends in courts. So I'm talking about criminal justice, but it's the same with all these matters. No matter what, if you see the big picture, our judicial system is always working to protect some part of our society and criminalizing other part of the society. And the law is a big, important tool in big political disputes. And it's a paradox that the system that is built to solve problems is also promoting wars. And this kind of wars is affecting dramatically the way that we experience our democracy. For example, the war on drugs is really useful to put some part of our society in jail. And it's not, there is nothing to do with the damage that the drugs can provoke. The criminalization of drugs has all to do with privileges. If I am a white person and I live in a rich neighborhood in Brazil, I can use drugs without any kind of problem. But if I'm a black person and I live in a favela, I will be in jail for almost nothing of drugs. So if the war on drugs is affecting our society due to the whole of the judicial system, we are talking about the prosecutors that decide who is going to be prosecuted or not. We are talking about the judges who are going to decide who is going to the jail or not. And we have thousands and thousands and thousands of people losing their lives in this system. In one side, we have this kind of effects. In the other side, the war on corruption, in the way that it's put in practice by our judicial system, is completely changing our experience. It has been a very useful tool to put out of the game some politicals that doesn't agree with some kind of policies. So if we look to Latin America in the last 10 years or 15 years, almost all the countries had political disputes decided by courts, and some very important people put it out of elections because of corruption accusations that are not systemic. They choose who are going to be charged and put these people out of the game. So I think we really need to make this systemic change. There was a question about this in the chat, and I think this is the main concern. And we need to, I really think we need to bring different kinds of knowledgement to help us to find new paths to solution, to solve our problems. Insist in rule of law as if it is the only way to contribute to find the solution is not going to help us to find new solutions. That's the truth.
It's really powerful, Luciana, and especially because we can see parallels to some of these issues around many parts of the world. So it's great that I know that your work is extending outside of Brazil and you're doing research in other places. So hopefully in terms of that systemic change, the research that you do will benefit multiple areas around the world. And then coming to Stephanie, Stephanie always shows up at all of the Changemaker lawyer events and conversations, which is so amazing because, you know, as a legal educator, that this topic interests you so much. And then just hearing from our colleagues, from our experiences in law school, as well as our experiences out in practice, really interested in how this awareness and your interest, how it informs the work that you do with your students and the type of lawyers that you envision that you're preparing for practice.
Yeah, I mean, I view my role now, having worked in the court system many years ago, I sort of migrated first to the entertainment industry and then to education, but have all along the way used my legal skills. And I view my role now as sort of empowering the change makers of today and tomorrow, that I want to produce more law students and lawyers who do the wonderful work of the other panelists here. But it's interesting, I spend most of my time not in the courtroom, but instead doing transactional work. And I work a lot with startups, many of whom have tremendous, creative and socially innovative ideas. And the lawyers and the law students who assist them really have to be co-creators in that. These incredibly innovative people don't want a lawyer that's just going to take notes. They want people who are going to help them shape the vision. And so getting law students to realize that their legal education is incredibly valuable, but it's but one tool in their toolbox. And they need to make sure that they're bringing their whole selves to it. I do think there's something about a law degree that that ability to sort of look at things on a micro and a macro level, that you've got your individual client, but you're also beholden to a bigger system of justice, I think gives us sort of an analytical, strategic approach to things that is critical. But I also think, the storytelling, which is, what I got into with my documentary filmmaking, I learned how to tell stories as a lawyer. And if you're going to have an impact in the courtroom or as a community organizer, or even someone who's, pitching to a funder, you need to be able to tell stories. And I think there's a lot to be said for what legal education can do in preparing law students for these many roles. But it is, part of why I come to these events and why I'm so passionate about it is reframing legal education, not to sort of lose what is obviously producing amazing people, but to supplement it so that law students, are prepared for many different careers.
Thanks, Stephanie. And the question of bringing your whole self to law practice is an interesting one. And like you said, in terms of having that background as a documentary filmmaker, how do you feel that informs your teaching style, and how did that inform your practice as well?
I mean, it was in filmmaking that I first became exposed to the world of social entrepreneurship, because in documentary filmmaking, you have to pull together funding from many different sources. And our organization, to be able to, although we were a nonprofit, to be able to survive in the entertainment industry, we had to look for social impact funding. And so that was, a big part of my introduction to this world. But I also am, a big believer in having my students be literate in media, some in production, some in how to use the media for their forms. I mean, I had a student who was really passionate about a particular case involving a local rap star who was prosecuted for having a song that included supposedly terroristic threats. And it was absolutely a violation of his First Amendment rights, but nobody was willing to sort of take the case. So the student went out and produced a crowdfunding campaign and, raised the money for the defense and eventually argued it before our Supreme Court and won the appeal. But he would not have been able to do that had he not, had that creative side that allowed him to also put together the campaign. And I think, your generation has grown up with this creativity. For me, it was much harder, but I think social media has introduced today's students to an ability to create content in a way that my generation could never dream of. And so it influences, the entertainment class I teach is very much experiential. I want students out in the community helping artists, filmmakers, athletes, people who are, have not just entertainment for entertainment's sake, but entertainment for a social impact sake.
Thanks, Stephanie. We are not quite done yet, but getting towards that point. And so we wanted to make sure we had time for some questions from our audience. So I'll turn it over to Anna to start us off with the first question.
Yes, so if you want to ask any more questions in the chat, I'll be monitoring that. But to start out, we have one from Irene Wu. And Stephanie, I think you would be perfect to answer this one. She asks, what are opportunities and experiences law students might seek out to prepare for a career as a creative change-making lawyer?
I mean, I know that Ashoka is considering opportunities to engage law students, which I'm thrilled about. But I think there are many, the sort of program that LAM is involved with of getting law students to work with community organizations. I mean, there are huge opportunities locally that you can have a tremendous with organizations that are already in the community. I mean, if the creativity you seek is in the arts sector, there are volunteer lawyers for the arts chapters all over the United States. And I'm sure there are similar organizations elsewhere that represent artists who cannot afford legal assistance and, need people to protect their rights, need people to fund their work. And so there's tremendous opportunities for doing that. But I do love this model of advocacy that involves the creation of media or working with media partners to tell the stories of people who are being disadvantaged in our communities, because I think that's another tool that lawyers in the future really need to be able to master as well.
Okay, so we have another question now. And Alain, I think this might be for you. It's asked, in order to make the legal studies more contemporary in Europe, which disciplines should be added with priority to the law study curriculum?
Well, the problem is that I finished law school in '96. So, but I don't know if it's still the case. I think in some way it's still the case. The problem in Europe was not so much, at least in Switzerland, which topic you had, because at least in the third or fourth year, you could choose. And if you want to do international, you could. The problem was that it was very much seen as basically and I know in France, I think in Germany, in some ways, it's still the same, where you as a student, you just sit and listen, and then you don't have all this, interaction. I know American law schools have influenced Europe in order to start changing that, but that was very much part of the problem. And that's the reason why I thought it was, but I think it's correct that it was because maybe it was master's program, but it was very interactive for us. And so I'm not sure so much about what kind of more studies you should add. I just want to come back to the previous questions, because even, in Europe, I saw many people who did law school with me 20, 30 years ago and became, whatever corporate lawyer. And again, in Europe, there was no pressure of money because they didn't have loans. None of us had loans. So it was not a question of money, but yet because of pressure, whatever, they thought it was safer to do 2-3 years in a bank or whatever. And today they come to me and say, oh, you were so brave, whatever, which I'm not sure it's true, but the really big advice, and I think all of us did that on that panel, just follow your heart. Please, 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 please do something you are passionate about. Because if, some of us are trying to make a difference, or maybe one day we'll make a difference or whatever, this is about passion and a work that is much more than a work, and something that you keep thinking about and you're almost obsessed about. And this is invaluable. I mean, nothing can, in my view. So really, to everybody out there, don't listen to whatever. Me, I took risk, which was a very small risk, but even people try to discourage me very much. And thank God I didn't listen to them. So really, really follow your heart, do something that interests you, whatever, even in banking law, whatever you do, but just get interested in what you're doing. Don't choose any other reason. I would say this is, I think, very important.
Thank you, Ellen. That's a really great insight. And we have another question. Lam, I think you might be able to answer this one. How can lawyers in the private sectors help support the work of changemakers today?
Sure. Actually, before I answer that, would it be possible for me to go back to the prior question? Because there's something I think that I'd love to be able to say about legal education.
Yes, of course.
Okay, so I have obviously not from the European law study curriculum, but I think one thing that I think is so important if we're going to think about creative change-making lawyers, that I think any legal education needs to incorporate, is to really think about courses and training on how we engage with people and how we engage with others. I think like the medical profession, for example, has really emphasized that the practice of medicine is not just diagnosing and completing surgery. It's also about how you engage with the patients that you have. And I think that we can't possibly transform the legal education and lawyering into something that is a really creative and change-making process if we don't interrogate and learn how we engage with others. Because I think legal education really has a tendency in any country to really say, lawyers, you are there to work with clients, and it's a transaction. And it takes away the humanity that I think is so critical in terms of partnership and community organizing. I love the chart that you showed, Anna, in the beginning of what skills are needed. And all of those skills are not skills that are going to be in listen to how you interpret the Constitution, or listen to a lecture about what torts or copyright law is. It's actually going to be skills like how do you engage with someone who's completely different from you? How do you really respect that it's the client who is going through trauma? How do you engage with non-lawyers when you're trying to negotiate a deal? I think that all that is really critical for legal education generally. In terms of the private sector, I think the private sector, the reality is a lot of the work that we need to get done is there are not enough resources for. And so the private sector is really the source that we turn to provide resources, but also in many ways like a foundation for the work that we would otherwise not be able to do. And what I mean by that is pro bono attorneys are often the ones who we turn to when we need when there are complicated cases, when there work that needs to be done that we can't do internally. And then I think the second part is I think the corporate sector and the private sector so also needs to think about these questions. I think, and I'm starting to see that in the US, and I hope in other countries they're starting to see that. We're seeing law firms say, you know, when we think about institutionalized racism, where we're seeing this reckoning in the US of this long history of discrimination and oppression, how are our policies, how are the decisions we make as a firm, and some of these firms are like international firms with $1 billion of revenue, they need to be questioning themselves, and they need to be thinking about their commitment to these international, national causes and their responsibility and their contributions to that. And I think that's something I'm starting to see, and I hope that more and more law firms will put that as part of their agenda to say, it can't just be business as usual. We have a responsibility to think about how our business decisions really impact our society.
Thank you, Lem. And I think that's exactly the direction that we're starting to see firms go in more and more. Does anyone else want to comment on any of the previous questions before I go to some other ones?
I'm sure we all have opinions about legal education. So I'm going to add my 2 cents in there. In a lot of countries, people don't do the separation of undergrad and law school. They might do the 3 or 4 years and be done with their education. The 3rd year of law school is superfluous. And especially when we're having this conversation where we're clearly not learning all of the skills that we need to go out and practice law during that time. The system could be changed so that legal education becomes part of maybe a 4 or 5 year program total. So that could be a major change. And I think there are some financial considerations at this point, maybe for not changing the model, but that could go a long way. And even in terms of student loans, right? That's a year or 2 plus shaved off. And then it also inhibits people in terms of their areas of practice they can go into sometimes, because some people feel like they have to pay the loans off, so they'll take jobs that they may not otherwise take. So we're probably losing a lot of changemaker lawyers that way as well.
Thank you so much for that insight, Annette. I think we might have time for one more question. And this one goes to the general structure and international community of lawyers. From Ina, she asks, is there an international or cross-country platform for creative changemaker lawyers to connect, support each other, and work together? Luciana, Alain, I know you both work internationally. Luciana, do you have any insight to an international or cross-country platform, how you're communicating with lawyers in different parts of the globe?
Actually, I don't know any big tool that put all of us together. We have some experience, like we have a very interesting group of women in Facebook that are always helping each other with this kind of things. But we also have some issues related to which kind of platform the global global south and the global north are used to use. So, for example, Facebook is still much used here, but it's not in other countries. So today, I don't really think there is one that can be this one platform, but there are some initiatives that can help in this challenge.
Alain, you also work across borders. Has it been a struggle in finding ways to connect with lawyers in different parts of the globe, especially when dealing with these international courts?
Well, I mean, in my field, international criminal law, it's a small field. So we pretty much know each other, and then you create your own platform. And this is the great advantage we all have, is that we are living in a time where this is quite easy to do. So this is what I have done. And basically I have create myself, my knowing some people and then discovering. And frankly, this is why I'm so excited, because I'm just a newcomer here. I just was, I would just become a fellow like a few weeks ago. So for example, some of the things Luciana said today was very quite challenging to me, because now I have this question to know whether there are structural bias, and I'm sure, as you said yourself, Annette, there are structural bias in international law, definitely, and this is a system done to protect itself without any doubt. So in a way, that's what I'm so excited about Ashoka, is that this is a global network where you can easily, as we do tonight or today, it's tonight in Europe, as we do connect and understand these different views. So I think this is in a way even richer, because in my field, we all sort of go through the same thing and have always the same conversation, whereas talking to all of you tonight, coming from different legal background and different experiences, what Lam said, what Luciana, all of you said was very inspiring for me. So actually for me, Ashoka, I think is a fantastic network. Otherwise I created my own network for international criminal law, but it's a small one.
Thank you so much, Alain. And Lam, I believe you had one final word on another network, Namanti's Legal Empowerment Network. If you want to talk a bit about that before we wrap up.
Oh, sure. I just wanted to mention for those of you who are particularly interested in really creative, empowering ways lawyers are supporting communities across the world. Namati has a legal empowerment network that I think I think it's over 1,000 different groups and organizations across the world, and it's a really vibrant community. And for me, what's really great is that it's not just lawyers. There are community paralegals, there are community activists and organizers in this network, thinking about all the different issues that are impacting them in their countries, and the ways that they're using legal tools and non-legal tools together to create change.
Thank you so much, Lam. And I think we're nearing the end of our session. So Annette, I'm going to turn that back over to you.
We just want to thank everyone again for joining us. Thanks for your very thought-provoking questions. Thanks again to our panelists. And so before we wrap up, we'll just give our panelists time if anyone wanted to give us any parting words that we can close on. Anything you didn't say that you wanted to share?
I will say that I hope I see many of you again at other Ashoka events. I like the exchange. There's a group of us that have been working together to sort of pull together a model syllabus for creating change-making lawyers. And this has been a wonderful conversation. I'd love to continue with the panelists, but also with students and what they're looking for in a legal education, because this really needs to be a co-creation process.
Yes, and so to the wild legal innovators heading to law school next year, if you can all get in touch with Anna if you're interested in being part of these conversations going forward. We would love to have your voice in there. Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much for attending.
Thank you all. It was a pleasure.